The sky was darkening when the ship began its descent. The stars scattered in every direction. As the vessel spiraled out of control, flames and smoke billowed from its engines, and it broke through the clouds with a deafening roar. The ship was alive with flashing warning lights. The screams of its passengers drowned out by the violent shaking. The controls were failing, and the ship veered toward the unknown planet below. In its final moments, the ship crashed through the trees, splitting the earth beneath it as the trees were uprooted, and the ground cracked open. The ship was a mess of burning metal and shattered glass. The intense heat forced any nearby wildlife to flee. The only sound was the crackle of the fire and the steady hum of the energy core still pulsing faintly within the wreckage. A small figure stirred amidst the debris, its body small and frail, its skin an odd mix of purple and silver, and its eyes glowing a soft blue. The alien cub opened its eyes for the first time and took in the strange world around it. It was disoriented and weak, its tiny limbs shaking as it crawled away from the wreckage, its body covered in cuts and bruises from the crash. Its mind was flooded with fear and confusion. The only thing it knew was that it was alone, and its parents were gone. The cub stumbled through the wreckage, its senses overloaded by the unfamiliar smells and sounds of the forest. The air was thick with the scent of wet earth and burnt wood, and the sky was cast in an orange hue from the setting sun. It whimpered weakly, its energy signature flickering like a dim star. It tried to call out for help, but all it could manage was a soft whimper. It didn't know where it was or what was happening. All it knew was that it had to find shelter before the darkness swallowed it whole. The cub stumbled into a dense thicket of trees and collapsed into the underbrush, its tiny chest heaving. As it tried to catch its breath, it curled into a ball, its glowing blue eyes dimming as it tried to shut out the pain. It could feel the energy within it flickering and weakening, but it had no idea how to make it stop. The strange world around it was both beautiful and terrifying, and it didn't know where to go. A low growl echoed from the darkness behind it. The cub tensed, its energy flaring up for a moment, but it was too weak to defend itself. The growl came again, closer this time, and the cub's heart raced. It didn't know what creatures lived in this strange place, but it could feel the danger closing in. It had no way to fight back. It could only hope that somehow it would survive long enough to find safety. The sound of footsteps breaking the underbrush made the cub freeze. It dared not move as the figure approached through the trees. The creature was large and human. It didn't know what to expect, but the person didn't seem to be a threat at first. The human was carrying a small pack and humming softly to themselves, unaware of the cub's presence. It was only when the human stopped and looked down that they saw the glowing blue eyes staring up at them. Sarah froze, her hand still holding the strap of her backpack. She had been hiking for hours with Ethan. When she heard the soft sound of a whimper, she knelt down, unsure of what she was seeing. A small creature glowing faintly in the darkness. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Its eyes locked onto hers with an expression of fear and curiosity. The cub's tiny body trembled as it made no attempt to flee. Instead, it seemed to be waiting for her to react. Ethan, who had been walking ahead, now came into view and gasped when he saw the cub crouching down to get a closer look. His excitement made Sarah instinctively reach out to stop him from getting too close, but the cub didn't run. It stayed, still watching them both, its energy flickering like a fragile flame. She had no idea what this creature was, but in that moment she knew one thing for sure: it needed help. Ethan crouched lower, his eyes wide with curiosity and wonder. The creature in front of him was unlike anything he had ever seen. It was small, barely the size of a dog, but its glowing skin shimmered in the fading light of the evening, like it was made of stardust. The cub's body trembled, its delicate frame shaking as it looked up at him. With those bright glowing eyes, Sarah felt a wave of protectiveness wash over her. She glanced around quickly, feeling the unease settle in her chest. It was getting late, and they were far from the trail. She didn't know what this creature was, but it clearly needed help. Ethan reached out a hand, slowly, trying not to startle the cub. His voice was soft, almost a whisper. "Hey, little guy," he said as he inched closer to the creature. The cub didn't move, its eyes never leaving his face. It blinked a few times, its tiny form shuddering, as if it couldn't decide whether to trust them. Sarah stepped forward cautiously, her mind racing with possibilities. She knew little about alien life or creatures from other worlds, But something about this one felt vulnerable. It wasn't threatening or hostile. It was simply lost and scared. Sarah finally knelt down beside Ethan, her heart racing. As she examined the cub more closely, she could see that its body was covered in strange markings. Ones she couldn't recognize. The skin was smooth, but there were faint lines running along its back, and sides like tattoos or scars that pulsed faintly in the twilight light. She reached out her fingers, hovering near the cub's side. It didn't flinch, it didn't recoil, it just stayed perfectly still, looking up at her. With a mixture of fear and longing, Sarah slowly brushed her hand along its back and was surprised by the warmth. She felt it was radiating a kind of energy that seemed to fill the air around them. It was then that she noticed something more disturbing, a faint crackling sound that seemed to come from within the cub's body, as if it was struggling to keep its energy in check. It wasn't like a normal creature, Sarah thought to herself. This wasn't just an injured animal, this was something different, something far more complex and powerful. The cub's energy fluctuated in strange bursts, and there were moments when it looked like it was going to collapse entirely. Ethan stood up and looked at her mom excitedly. "It's not going anywhere. I think it trusts us," he said, his voice filled with wonder and innocence. Sarah's gaze softened as she looked at her son. She knew the child in front of her could be reckless at times, but there was something about his compassion for this creature that touched her heart. She took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision before her. They couldn't leave it out here alone. It wasn't safe, not with night falling, and whatever might be lurking nearby. She glanced around the forest. The air felt heavier now as the silence stretched on, and the darkness seemed to close in. "Okay," she said after a long pause, "we'll take it with us. But we have to be careful. We don't know what it is or what it needs, but we're not leaving it here, not like this." Ethan smiled broadly and crouched down to help the cub stand up, but the creature didn't move at first. It looked up at them hesitantly, but then seemed to recognize the kindness in their actions. Slowly, its tiny limbs began to lift itself, its energy flickering and pulsing with an almost tentative strength. Sarah reached out gently, and the cub nuzzled her hand just slightly. The bond was formed in that moment, and Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle onto her shoulders. This was no longer just a strange encounter. This was a decision that would change their lives forever. They gently helped the cub to its feet and began to make their way back to the trail, with the creature following them slowly at first. But with each step it seemed to trust them more. The light of the setting sun now completely gone, and the stars above them shining brightly as they walked. The air felt thick with possibilities and the unknown. The cub's soft glowing body illuminated the path ahead of them, but what lay beyond that trail was a mystery Sarah couldn't yet fathom. The walk back to the car felt like it took forever. The forest around them was dark now, the trees looming over them like silent sentinels. The air was cool and still except for the occasional rustle of leaves as the wind whispered through the branches. The cub walked beside them, its small feet padding softly against the ground, glowing faintly with every step. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching them. She kept glancing over her shoulder, half expecting to see eyes in the shadows, but the forest remained still. Ethan kept talking to the cub in a low voice, as if trying to comfort it, though he had no idea what it was or how to care for it. He made small noises and gestures, trying to get a response from the strange creature. It seemed to respond in kind, with soft whimpers and small movements of its body, as if it was listening closely to Ethan's words. When Ethan would stop and wait for a reply, the cub would slowly shuffle closer to him, nuzzling his leg and making small chirping sounds, almost like a form of communication. Sarah watched all of this, her heart swelling with a strange mix of pride and unease. By the time they reached the car, the cub was no longer hesitating. With every step, it grew more confident, and its energy began to stabilize, its faint glow now more constant than before. The small creature seemed to feel more secure with them around, and in a strange way that comforted Sarah as well. She was no expert on alien life forms or biology, but this creature was something else. It was different from anything she had ever encountered. She opened the door to the car and helped Ethan inside. She looked over at the cub, who had paused for a moment, looking up at her with those bright glowing eyes before it followed them. and clambered into the back seat, its body curling up on the floorboards beside them, as if it had done this 1,000 times before. The car smelled like leather and gasoline, but it didn't seem to mind. It settled in quietly, its energy now a soft hum in the background, as Sarah started the engine and pulled onto the road. As they drove through the winding forest road, Sarah couldn't help but think about what this could mean for them all. Her mind raced with questions. She had no answers to what was this creature, what had happened to its ship and its family, what would she do if the authorities found out about it, what would happen to the cub then. But as she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw Ethan's excited face lit by the soft glow of the cub, she knew there was no going back. They had already made a choice, and that choice was to protect this strange being that had found its way to them. The drive home was quiet except for Ethan, occasionally whispering to the cub, and the soft humming noise that filled the car from the creature's energy. Sarah's thoughts were a swirl of worry and wonder, but she pushed them aside for now, focusing on the road ahead and on the small family now riding in the car with her. The normal world outside seemed so far away, and yet the strange presence of the cub made it seem insignificant in comparison. When they arrived home, Sarah parked the car in the driveway and turned off the engine. Ethan immediately opened the door and rushed out into the yard. The cub hesitated for a moment, but then followed him, its glowing form lighting up the yard. As it moved toward the house, Sarah stepped out of the car, slowly watching them both with a feeling of uncertainty growing in her chest. What had she gotten them into? She didn't know, but one thing was clear. This wasn't just some strange accident. This was something bigger, and she had no idea what kind of future lay ahead for them all. But she was ready to face it, whatever it was. Sarah watched as Ethan led the cub into the backyard, the evening sky now filled with the first stars of the night casting a pale light across the grass. She followed them slowly, taking in the sight of her son crouching down to talk to the creature, his excitement evident in the way he moved with ease around it. The cub was clearly curious about its new surroundings, sniffing the air and exploring the perimeter of the yard, its glowing form shifting with every movement. Sarah was still unsure of what to do next. She couldn't just let this thing roam free without knowing anything about it or what it needed, but she couldn't bring herself to turn it away either. The cub seemed to grow more comfortable with every minute, its small form moving around the yard with growing confidence. It was as if it had never been in a place so calm, so safe before. Sarah couldn't help but watch with a mix of wonder and trepidation. The creature was unlike anything she had ever seen, yet there was something undeniably human about the way it reacted to Ethan. It trusted him, and in turn Sarah could see that Ethan was already treating it as if it were a friend or even a pet. She turned to go inside, but stopped when she saw the faintest glow radiating from the cub, its energy pulsing in waves that seemed to make the very air vibrate with intensity. She wasn't sure if it was deliberate or if it was just a side effect of the creature's strange biology, but it was clear that it had power she didn't understand. Yet the soft hum in the air became louder and more pronounced as the cub stood still, watching her with its glowing eyes, as if waiting for something. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, wondering if it was trying to communicate, but she wasn't sure how to respond, or if it even had a way of understanding her language. Ethan was still crouched by the cub, his voice low and soothing, as he tried to coax it to follow him inside the house. He was excited and unafraid of the alien presence next to him. His natural instincts told him to treat it like any other animal, to show it kindness and patience. But Sarah's mind was racing with thoughts of the unknown. What did this creature need? How would they care for it? What if something went wrong? She stepped forward slowly, the tension in her body mounting as she approached them. She didn't want to scare the cub or push it into a corner, but it felt like a moment where something would change, something she couldn't fully understand. But she had to try to make it clear they were trying to help it. The cub's eyes locked onto hers for a moment before it finally moved toward her, hesitant at first, but then with growing certainty. It took a few tentative steps closer to her, and Sarah reached down gently to touch its small head. Feeling its warmth under her fingertips, the strange energy that radiated from it was still there, but now it seemed to calm with her touch. The cub leaned into her hand ever so slightly, and for a brief moment, Sarah felt the weight of its trust pressing down on her shoulders. It was as if it knew they were its only hope, and that realization hit her with a quiet force. She had to protect it no matter what. She couldn't turn away. She wouldn't turn away. Ethan stood up excitedly and ran to the door of the house. "Come on, Mom, let's get it inside. It's cold out here," he said, almost pleading with her. Sarah smiled at him and nodded, but her eyes stayed on the cub. She wasn't sure what the future held, but the creature had already become part of their family, whether she was ready for it or not. Together, they led the cub into the house. Sarah watched as it stepped carefully across the threshold, its glowing body lighting up the dark hallway. For a moment before it stopped to look around the unfamiliar space, it was cautious, still unsure, but the more it explored, the more at ease it seemed to become. Sarah and Ethan both watched the cub in silence, wondering what the next step would be and what they would learn about this strange new member of their family. The cub hesitated at the threshold of the living room, its small body flickering with soft pulses of light. As it surveyed its new surroundings, the walls of the house seemed to be filled with unfamiliar scents. But there was something oddly calming about the space. The cub's energy continued to hum in the air as it took its first steps inside the living room, its eyes glowing faintly in the dim light. It moved with caution, sniffing the furniture and scanning every corner of the room. With quiet curiosity, Sarah and Ethan watched it carefully from the doorway, unsure of what to expect next, but feeling a growing sense of wonder and concern. Ethan had already grabbed a few blankets from the couch and laid them down on the floor beside him. "Come on, little guy," he said in a gentle tone, patting the soft fabric and beckoning the cub to come closer. The cub looked at him for a moment, its blue eyes flickering with uncertainty, but after a few seconds it padded toward Ethan and nuzzled the blankets hesitantly, settling down into the makeshift bed with a quiet hum. It wasn't perfect, but it seemed to accept it as a safe spot for the moment. Sarah stayed by the door for a while, her arms crossed and her mind racing. She couldn't ignore the growing sense of responsibility she felt for the creature in front of her. She didn't know how to take care of it. She didn't know if it could even be treated like any other animal. But one thing was certain: the cub was no ordinary being, and she was now fully responsible for its well-being. Her eyes flicked toward Ethan as he sat on the floor next to the cub, stroking its glowing body with a tenderness that made her heart swell. She saw the trust that had already formed between them, the connection that seemed to have been established in the short time since they found the cub. It was clear that Ethan already considered the cub a part of their family, and despite all of her doubts and concerns, Sarah couldn't deny the warmth she felt watching the two of them together. She didn't understand the full extent of what they were dealing with, but seeing Ethan's genuine affection for the creature made her realize something important. This wasn't just an alien being, it was a child in need of protection. It was helpless in this unfamiliar world, and she had to be its protector just as much as Ethan had already become its friend. Sarah walked over slowly to the couch and sat down with a sigh. She glanced at the cub once more before looking at Ethan. "You're sure about this, aren't you?" she asked, her voice soft but filled with concern. Ethan nodded without hesitation. "Yeah, Mom, it's like it trusts us already. I can feel it," he said, looking at the cub and then back at her with a grin. Sarah smiled back at him, despite herself, but the worry in her chest remained. She wasn't sure what to do next or how to move forward, but the first step had already been taken. They had taken the cub in, and she would figure out the rest later. As the night settled and the house became quiet except for the soft hum of the cub's energy, it was an odd sound, almost like a low electrical buzz that filled the room. But it wasn't unsettling, it was calming in its own way. Sarah noticed that the cub seemed to be absorbing the peaceful atmosphere of the home slowly, its glowing body dimming ever so slightly as if relaxing into its surroundings. For the first time since they found it, the cub was no longer trembling, it was settling into its new life. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that it was still holding something back, as if there was more to it than met the eye. Ethan stretched out beside the cub and laid his hand gently on its back. "I'm gonna sleep here tonight, okay, little guy?" he whispered. The cub gave a soft chirp in response and curled up beside him, its glowing body now a steady, peaceful pulse in the darkness. Sarah watched them for a moment, her thoughts swirling. She knew they couldn't stay hidden forever. The world outside was still waiting for answers, and whatever force had sent the cub here would soon be looking for it. But for now the house was quiet and safe, and that was enough to hold on to for the moment. She lay back on the couch, closing her eyes. But sleep wouldn't come, not yet. She had too many questions, and far too many unknowns. But at least for now, she had a family to protect, and that was enough to keep her focused on the road ahead. The morning came slowly, a soft light creeping through the curtains. As the house remained still, the silence was broken only by the gentle hum of the cub's energy filling the room. It was strange to wake up to the presence of such an otherworldly creature beside them. Yet it felt almost normal now, like it belonged. Sarah stretched and rubbed her eyes before sitting up on the couch, her gaze immediately falling on Ethan, who was still asleep on the floor next to the cub. The two of them were curled up together in a peaceful bundle. The cub's glowing form was barely visible in the dim light, but the steady rhythm of its energy told Sarah it was still there, still present, and calming in a way she couldn't quite describe. Sarah stood up quietly, not wanting to wake them just yet. As she walked into the kitchen, she couldn't help but think about the day ahead. What would they do now? How would they explain the cub to anyone who might ask? What if someone came looking for it? She shook her head and pushed the thoughts aside for now. She had to focus on the here and now. And for the moment, the cub was safe with them in the house. After a few minutes, Ethan stirred on the floor and sat up, blinking sleepily. He rubbed his eyes and smiled when he saw the cub still curled up beside him. He gently reached out and stroked its soft body. "A little guy," he whispered. The cub gave a soft chirp in response, but didn't move much, its energy signature still flickering with quiet strength. Ethan chuckled and stood up, stretching his arms. The cub watched him curiously, but didn't seem eager to follow just yet. Sarah turned from the kitchen counter and looked at Ethan. "Well, it looks like he's settled in," she said, trying to sound casual, but there was a deep concern in her voice. Ethan turned to her and nodded enthusiastically. "Yeah, Mom, it's like he's already part of the family. He looks so happy here," he added, as he crouched down next to the cub again and reached for the small bundle of blankets. Sarah watched them for a moment, feeling both pride and unease. She wasn't sure what was happening between them, but there was no denying the bond that had formed so quickly. It was something strong and undeniable, and it made her heart swell with both love and fear. She sighed and ran her fingers through her hair. "I just don't understand why this happened," Sarah admitted. "I don't know what to do about any of this," she said, shaking her head. "I don't even know who to ask for help. What if we're in danger, or worse, what if we leave people to him?" She gestured toward the cub, the weight of the unknown pressing down on her shoulders. Ethan looked up at her with a serious expression. "It's okay, Mom, we'll figure it out together. We're strong," he said with a quiet certainty in his voice. Sarah smiled at him and nodded, though her mind was still swirling with questions. Just then, there was a soft knock at the door. Sarah's heart skipped a beat, and she immediately froze. The knock was quiet but insistent, and it sent a shiver down her spine. She looked at Ethan, who was already on his feet, his eyes wide with worry. Who could it be? She asked herself softly. She walked slowly toward the door, her footsteps muffled against the wooden floor, but when she reached for the handle, she stopped, her hand hovering above it, as she realized the danger of answering it with the cub in the house. The last thing they needed was attention right now. Ethan stepped up beside her. "Mom, who is it?" he whispered, his voice filled with unease. Sarah hesitated, but then took a deep breath. As she opened the door just a crack, cautiously peering through the small opening, she wasn't sure who would be on the other side, but she was certain the person at the door wasn't a stranger at all. Sarah's breath caught in her throat when she saw who stood on the other side of the door, a tall figure with short dark hair, wearing a worn jacket and a strange badge pinned to his chest. His expression was serious and calm, but there was something in his eyes, something sharp, that made Sarah instinctively take a step back. He looked at her. For a moment, his gaze steady, but calculating, his eyes flicking to the side. Just briefly before returning to her face, he spoke softly, but with authority. "I'm looking for something. A small creature crashed nearby last night," he said, his voice low but firm, his eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to gauge her reaction. Sarah's heart began to race, her mind spinning with possibilities. She knew exactly what he was talking about, but how could he know? She swallowed hard and tried to keep her voice steady. "Sorry, "But I think you're mistaken," she said, trying to sound convincing. But even as the words left her mouth, she knew it wasn't true. She could feel the weight of his gaze pressing on her. He was watching her closely, trying to read every movement, every shift of her eyes. And she could feel the tension building between them. "I haven't seen anything strange," she added, forcing a smile she hoped was reassuring. But deep down she knew it wasn't enough. The man didn't seem convinced. The figure stood silently for a moment, his eyes still fixed on her. He was waiting for something, a slip-up maybe, or a sign of guilt. His lips pressed into a thin line before he spoke again. "I know you found it," he said, his voice now colder, his tone carrying an edge of warning. "I can see it in your eyes. You know what I'm talking about. It's not safe to keep it here," he added with a subtle but undeniable threat. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest. She felt trapped for a moment, unsure of what to do or say. He was right about one thing. She could feel the fear creeping up inside her, but she couldn't let him know how much he had already unsettled her. Ethan was standing behind her now, his small form barely visible, but his wide eyes watching the stranger carefully. The cub's energy signature seemed to flicker nervously from the other room, and Sarah's stomach twisted at the thought of what might happen. If the man found out too much, she needed to protect them both. She needed to keep the cub safe, no matter the cost. She glanced down at Ethan, who was gripping her sleeve tightly, his face pale. "Mom, who is it?" Ethan asked in a soft whisper, his voice filled with confusion and fear. Sarah reached down and gently placed a hand on his shoulder, keeping her eyes fixed on the stranger. "You need to leave," she said, her voice firm now, but with an undercurrent of urgency. She could feel the pressure building inside her chest, her body tense and ready to act. "I don't know what you want, but I'm not giving it to you. Whatever it is you think, you know you're wrong." The man didn't flinch, his gaze never leaving her face, his lips curled into a slight smirk. "I'm just trying to protect you," he said quietly. "This creature isn't something you want to get involved with. You have no idea what's coming. And if you think you're keeping it safe here, you're wrong." He stepped forward just a fraction, his voice dropping lower. "We both know what it is, and we both know it can't stay with you." Sarah's pulse quickened. She couldn't let him intimidate her. She couldn't let him take control. She had no idea who this man was or what he was truly after. But she wasn't about to back down. She stepped back slightly and closed the door, a fraction of an inch, enough to put some distance between them. Her voice was low, but fierce. "You need to leave now," she said. For a moment, the man said nothing. He just stood there watching her with that unreadable expression. Then with a sharp exhale, he took a step back and gave a brief nod. "Fine," he muttered, "but this isn't over. You can't hide from this forever." With that, he turned and walked away, his footsteps echoing in the quiet street. As Sarah stood there frozen for a long moment, her mind reeling with fear and uncertainty. But when she turned back into the house, she was met with a quiet tension that had settled over everything. The cub's energy had dimmed slightly, and Ethan was still staring at her with wide eyes, as if waiting for an explanation. She took a deep breath and knelt down in front of him. "We have to be careful from now on," she said, her voice steady, but filled with a new determination. The silence in the house was thick with unspoken questions. The tension from the man's visit still hung in the air, like a storm waiting to break. Sarah looked at Ethan, trying to keep her composure, but she could see the worry in his eyes, and it mirrored her own. The cub's energy was flickering softly in the background, still present, but now more cautious, almost as if it sensed the change in the atmosphere. Sarah stood up slowly and turned toward the hallway where the cub was curled up, still lying on the blankets. She moved toward it, carefully keeping her steps quiet, not wanting to alarm it. She crouched down beside the cub and reached out to touch its soft body. Its warmth was steady beneath her fingertips, but there was a nervous energy in the way it responded to her touch. It didn't recoil, but it seemed to shrink back slightly, as if sensing the shift in the house. Ethan stepped up beside her after a moment and knelt down. "I don't like what he said, Mom," he whispered, his voice shaky. "We can't let him take the cub away." Sarah's heart clenched at his words. She could feel the fear in his voice, and it only fueled her own resolve. No one was taking the cub from them. Not now, not ever. She looked at Ethan and nodded. "I know," she said softly. "We're not going to let that happen. But we have to be careful from now on," she added, her voice low and steady. "The world outside is looking for it. They know something's out there, and they won't stop until they find it. But we can't let them take it." Sarah took a deep breath and turned her gaze back to the cub. Its eyes were now focused on them, both watching them with an almost pleading look. Sarah could feel the weight of the creature's trust, and it only made her more determined she would protect it no matter what. Ethan reached out and gently stroked the cub's back. "We'll keep you safe," he said in a soft whisper like a promise. The cub made a quiet chirp. In response, its energy flickering more brightly for a moment, as if reassured by Ethan's words. Sarah watched them for a long moment, her heart swelling with love for both of them. But the fear still gnawed at her mind. What would happen if they couldn't keep the cub hidden? What would happen if the people looking for it found them? They needed to figure out their next steps, and fast. She thought they couldn't afford to wait around hoping things would work themselves out. The man had warned them, and now they knew that others were searching too. Sarah stood up and paced for a moment, trying to think of what they could do, where they could hide the cub, how they could keep it safe. But nothing came to mind. She wasn't prepared for this. No one could have been prepared for an alien life form to crash into their world and demand their protection. "We have to find out who they are," Sarah muttered to herself under her breath. "The people looking for the cub, they know more than they're letting on. They have to." She turned to Ethan. "And the cub, I don't know how yet, but we'll figure this out together," she said with quiet determination. "We have to keep moving forward. We have to protect it no matter what." Ethan looked up at her and nodded, his expression serious and calm. For a moment he seemed older than his years, his words a soft promise. "Yeah, we will," he said softly. "We'll keep it safe. We'll find a way." Sarah gave him a small smile. Even though the fear was still there, it was mixed now with a new sense of purpose. They couldn't let the cub down, and they couldn't let anyone take it from them, not when they had already made it part of their family. But as the day passed and the evening drew near, the shadow of the man's warning still loomed over them. They couldn't stay hidden forever. The hunt for the cub had already begun, and no matter how much they wanted to protect it, the world outside was closing in. The following days felt like a blur. Sarah and Ethan moved cautiously through their routines, always glancing over their shoulders and always aware of the cub's every movement. The creature had settled into their lives in a way that felt almost natural, but the fear that hung over them like a cloud never fully lifted. The cub was still learning how to adapt to its new surroundings, but there were moments when its energy would flicker uncontrollably, as if something was pushing it to reveal itself, as if it could sense the danger outside growing closer. Sarah spent most of her time trying to keep them both safe. She made sure the cub stayed hidden from view, and when Ethan was at school, she made sure to lock the doors and keep the windows covered as much as possible. She learned how to keep her movements quiet and deliberate. She tried to stay calm, but inside her mind was constantly racing. How much longer could they stay hidden? How much longer before someone else found them? Ethan continued to grow more attached to the cub, his connection with it growing deeper every day. The cub was still small, but its energy was more stable now, and its glow had faded into something softer, more subdued, but still present. Ethan had taken to speaking to it as if it understood every word, and the creature seemed to respond to his voice with an almost human-like recognition. The bond between them was undeniable, and it gave Sarah a small sense of relief, even in the midst of the uncertainty that hung over them. One evening, as they sat together in the living room, the cub lying curled up beside Ethan, Sarah noticed a faint glow coming from outside the window. She froze for a moment and peered through the curtains. There was no movement in the yard, but something didn't feel right. She felt a chill run down her spine as her instincts screamed at her to be cautious. She turned back to Ethan, who was oblivious to the shift in the atmosphere. "Hey, buddy," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We should go to bed soon. It's getting late." Ethan looked up at her with a small frown, but nodded reluctantly. Just as they started to move toward the hallway, there was a sudden loud knock at the door. Sarah's heart stopped. She knew who it was before she even opened it. She could feel the weight of his presence through the wood of the door. She glanced at Ethan and saw the fear in his eyes. She grabbed his hand quickly and pulled him toward the back door. "We have to go now," she said in a whisper. "Don't make any noise." Ethan nodded, and they moved as quietly as possible toward the back of the house. The cub had already gotten to its feet, its body glowing faintly as it followed them through the hallway. Sarah's pulse quickened, and her breath came faster as she opened the back door just enough to slip through. She could hear the man's voice now through the door, asking questions, demanding that she open up. But she didn't stop to listen. She grabbed Ethan's hand tighter and pulled him into the night. They moved through the yard as quickly and silently as possible, the cub close behind them, its energy signature faint, but still present. Sarah didn't know where they were going or how long they could keep running, but she knew they couldn't stay there, not anymore. She had to protect them both. She had to get them far away from whatever was coming. The cold night air rushed past them as they ran, the trees around them providing cover, but offering no safety from the danger that pursued them. The cub's energy remained steady, but Sarah could feel it pulsing harder now, as if it too understood the danger they were in. It was too late to turn back now. They had crossed a line, and there was no way to hide anymore. Sarah didn't know how long they ran or how far they went, but eventually they reached the edge of the woods and the lights of the town in the distance. She paused for a moment, trying to catch her breath, the weight of the decision pressing on her chest. But when she looked down at Ethan and the cub standing beside her, she knew there was no turning back. They were in this together now, and they would face whatever came next as a family.